das Setting ist ja soweit klar. Wie gesagt, das ganze Format ist auf Shortcut angelegt, sozusagen passend zum Format, das kurze Inputs und dann kurze, knappe Diskussionen. Und ja, ich glaube, inhaltlich sind ja die Themen klar. Und sind wir sehr gespannt drauf und freuen uns sehr drauf. Julia, du machst, es gibt Seminare.
Ich mache gerade noch ein bisschen Setting, das Livestream und okay, dann gehen wir jetzt live. Thomas, we are live.
Okay, hello, thanks, Julia, and hello to everybody this afternoon, sunny afternoon in Berlin and around, hopefully for you too. We are starting our next edition of our shortcut, New Economy Shortcut, with a special edition on Italy. And the basic idea was to sort out among a lot of political debates and emotional debates on the role of Italy and the image of Italy, especially in Germany, but also in other countries, what is really behind all these discussions. And we have invited two brilliant experts who will sort out and discuss what is the real data behind and the real facts behind the discussion. I don't need to introduce a lot to the topic, because I think everyone knows that there is a lot of discussion each and every time when Euro crisis, some turbulence is arising, like last year when the Corona crisis came up. And then very often there are hot debates on the role and responsibility of whatever country, and especially around Italy. So very happy to have you here. I will hand over to Julia, who will moderate the session. Julia Licca is member of the Forum New Economy team. And by the way, she's Italian.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, welcome everyone from my side as well. Yes, Thomas already gave a little overview of what today's shortcut is going to be about, so I will not steal much for the time, as we will try to be faithful to the format and keep it short. So I will go by presenting and welcoming our two guests of today, Philipp Heimberger and Daniel Stelter. Philipp Heimberger is an economist at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. Last February, he launched this Twitter campaign called the campaign against Italy nonsense, where he shares data-backed arguments, so to say, in the attempt to debunk some of the myths, false myths or clichés about Italian economy. They're usually spread and also intensified somewhat by the dominant narrative and by the public discourse that describes the state of things in Italy. Philipp has prepared a very nice presentation for us to introduce us in the topic, to which our second guest, Daniel Stelter, will react, or rather present his points of view. Daniel Stelter is a macroeconomist and founder of the forum Beyond the Obvious, where among a variety of topics, he has also expressed himself about Italy, and often putting forward the argument that Italian households are richer or have more assets than German households, and so that essentially Italy could solve its own debt problems, or that in a way the cry for help to the EU or the call for joint bonds is not justified by the reality of facts. So at which data should we look at to verify or falsify these and other claims? Hopefully it will become a bit clearer today. And and since Thomas already revealed that I come from Italy, I would like to make a little invitation to our guests to not be held back by this information, to be just as open as they want with their arguments. I'm not here to judge. And Thomas and Philipp, please go on with your presentation.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the debate. Okay, so let me try to share my slides. I hope you can see them. So what I want to do is I want to pose the question whether this standard story that we often hear about Italy, which is that one of the main problems of Italy is a lack of fiscal discipline, and that Italians have basically been living beyond their means at the expense of others in Europe, whether this standard story actually is consistent with looking at the data. So we'll talk about some stuff that I would call Italy myths, and we can then debate consequences for policymaking in Europe. So I think the myths that I will talk about, they can be found in quality media as well as in statements by leading politicians. I think we just need to look around to actually see them. I brought two examples. One is this cover from the German magazine Der Spiegel, showing this guillotine as a spaghetti with the title Ciao Amore, Italy is destroying itself and ruining Europe by doing so. Another example would be this cover by the Economist, which also kind of speaks to certain stereotypes about Italy. Then here are a couple of selected quotes from leading European politicians, heads of state or finance ministers. The entire Italian system is broken. Italy is incapable to reform, can't keep its budget in order. Balanced budgets are almost unattainable without external pressure. So what I want to do over the next couple of slides is to pose the question whether such statements actually are consistent with the data. And I want to go through some of the main elements of the standard story that I often hear about and read about in media, especially in Germany, but not only. The first element is that Italy suffers from a lack of fiscal discipline that puts the whole Eurozone at risk. Actually, when you look at the data, they tell a somewhat different, or at least more nuanced story. Actually, what many people don't know is that Italy is somewhat an austerity champion when you look at the data from the early 1990s up to 2009. So here I show you data from the International Monetary Fund, fiscal consolidation efforts, which are defined here as government spending cuts or tax increases that are motivated by a desire to cut the budget deficit. And what you can see here clearly is that by far Italy is the advanced country with the largest fiscal consolidation efforts since the early 90s, and also the country with the largest spending cuts. This is also consistent with looking at the data for primary budget balances. So the primary budget balance is the headline fiscal balance when you exclude interest payments. And here the black line is for Italy. And when you look at primary budget surpluses, you see that Italy was running consistently primary budget surpluses from the early 1990s up to the COVID-19 crisis. And actually primary budget surpluses were higher than in Germany, actually higher than in any other country when you look at IMF data. So the question then is, okay, but why is then there a problem with public debt in Italy? And this is what we can look at the next slide. So here I show you the decomposition of contributions to changes in public debt to GDP. So why does Italy have a problem with public debt? A lot of that is due to the legacy of the 1980s, which you can also see from this slide. This was a period when interest payments increased strongly. These are the blue bars. And when interest payments were higher than GDP growth rates. Plus, there were primary deficits in the 1980s, and this led to a strong increase in public debt to GDP ratios. Then, in the early 1990s, Italy committed itself to the Maastricht Treaty, and it also committed itself to joining the euro, and therefore it also committed itself to consistent fiscal consolidation efforts, as I showed on the last slide. And this is something you can also see on this chart, that there were these consistent primary budget surpluses, which contributed to pushing down public debt to GDP. So that was a factor that kind of pushed it down. Unfortunately, growth faltered. So economic growth rates were very low over the last 20, 25 years. And therefore, Italy was unable to grow out of its public debt. And from this perspective, you could say that, well, running pretty high primary surpluses over a long period of time is not necessarily good, or does not necessarily give a boost to public debt sustainability if economic growth falters at the same time. So let me move to the next element of the standard story about Italy, which is that Italians have been living above their means, so that they should tighten their belts. From an economic point of view, I would argue that this makes little sense. Italy has not been borrowing from abroad. Actually, when you look at the data, as I do at this chart, you find that Italy is a net exporter of goods and services. So Italians produce and export more in terms of goods and services than they consume and import. Italy actually posts current account surpluses. Italy is a net capital exporter. So from this economic point of view, it makes little sense to argue that Italians have been living above their means. If anything, you could argue that they have actually been living below their means. What actually also many people don't realize is that debt is not a problem in all sectors of the Italian economy. If you look at private sector debt, you find that this is relatively low in Italy compared to other OECD countries. Actually, OECD data here suggests that private sector debt is at a similar level as in Germany. Moving to the next element of the standard story, which is that Italian governments are unable or unwilling to push for painful reforms. This also does not hold. I mean, if you, for example, look at OECD reports on reform efforts over the last couple of decades, Italy actually turns out to be a top performer in several categories. Also, when it comes to labor market deregulation and product market reforms. I will now only talk, or mainly talk about a little bit about labor market liberalization, because this is also something many people don't seem to realize, that there were major labor market liberalization reforms since the 1990s in Italy, and this flexibilization has led to a sharp increase in fixed-term contracts, has also promoted the decline of trade unions and falling real wages. Most recently, there were cuts in employment protection by the Renzi government in 2014. And so what you can see here also is that flexibilization pushed towards more temporary jobs, and it also led to an increasing labor intensity of production. That is kind of also what was intended with these reforms. But studies on the Italian economy also suggest that these labor market liberalization reforms reduced incentives for labor-saving investments by companies. And this was also not good for productivity growth. So at least parts of the explanation for why productivity growth kind of fell sharply starting from the 1990s is labor market reforms. Then I think Mr. Stelter will talk more about this. We often hear that Italians are wealthier than Germans, and therefore they should pay for their investment themselves. Let's debate that in more detail later. I just think that this argument is also difficult to hold in this generality, and you would need to be much more nuanced about this. Here I look at ECB data for net wealth of private households. And what this tells you is that actually the average net wealth of private households in Italy is lower than the average for the Eurozone, for Germany, or for Austria. It is true that the median net wealth of private households in Italy is higher than, for example, in Germany. So kind of the household in the middle of the wealth distribution, where 50% are wealthier and 50% are less wealthy, owns more in terms of net wealth than in Germany. What is behind that? Well, more people in Italy actually own the flat or the house they are living in, whereas more people are on rent in Germany. But this does not necessarily mean that the standard of the condominiums in Italy are higher than in Germany, where you have more social housing, or in countries like Austria, where you have much more social housing. And social housing does not show as a private asset, and therefore also does not enter net wealth calculations here. And that is kind of behind this finding that median net wealth in Italy is higher. All in all, I would say this general argument that Italians are wealthier than Germans is difficult to hold. Okay, I'm already close to finishing. Let me just say, why should we care about this, right? Why should we care about agreeing on some basic facts and thinking about a public discourse on Italy? Because I would argue that it has been poisoning the democratic discourse. This discourse is often inconsistent with basic facts, and it is kind of undermining a more pragmatic discussion about actually existing problems in Italy. And I mean, problems do exist. We should not push them under the carpet. Obviously, for example, you have this northern Italy, southern Italy polarization, which is very persistent. You have problems with the banking sector. You have problems with tax morale. Weak domestic demand, insufficiency of domestic demand over a very long period of time, and declining productivity. But the point I want to make here is that I think if we want to have pragmatic discussion about policy and tackle some of these problems successfully, then we must stop with these very distorted views that are promoted by quality media and leading politicians as well. This has also had a negative impact on diplomatic relations between European countries, with implications for economic policy decisions. If you think about last year when the COVID-19 crisis hit, so during this first phase of the crisis, you had very high tensions between countries, a lot of stories being launched. When it comes to Italy, you had very high tensions in the debates around the EU Recovery Fund, Next Generation EU. I think it would have been much easier to agree on large grants component for this temporary facility if it had not been for the widespread of distorted views about Italy and other southern European countries. So from this perspective, I think we really should care. So what next? I think we have a problem in Germany, but also other countries. We have kind of a recycling of views, very distorted views that are not consistent with basic facts and data. So we really need to improve, I think, the quality of the intellectual debate and political culture. What is true is there is a lot at stake in Italy. Also for broader Europe, it is very important that we make Next Generation EU a success. This will be something that will shape European integration debates for the years, if not decades to come. But I think we also need to think beyond that about a long-term investment agenda and industrial policy that kind of allows Italy to recover sustainably. Okay, so let me finish. The point I want to make here is the way we talk about Italy and its problems matters. That's also why I've been vocal over the last year or so, kind of trying to make people aware of some questionable elements also of public discourse. Doing this little social media campaign, writing a couple of articles, and also doing some interviews. So I think we really need to change the way we talk about all of this, and then have a good policy debate. Okay, thanks for your attention. Looking forward to questions and the debate.
Yes, thank you very much, Philip. I would not indulge further and just give right away the word to Daniel. Should I share your presentation, Daniel?
Yes, I will share my presentation. I will try. I hope it works. So good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And I know that I have now to play the role of the bad guy, of being the one who is so critical on Italy. The funny thing is that on most parts, actually, we are agreeing. I will try to make it short, but I know I have the question. Okay. I make it very simple. First of all, where do we agree? We agree on all what you said, basically. And I never actually stated something different just to defend myself. The only disagreement we are having is on the question of private wealth, but I will show you it doesn't matter in the end. Italy truly saved primary surplus. Italy is a net saver like Germany, by the way. I'm not sure it's a clever policy. I would rather think it's a stupid policy to have trade surpluses in that sense. Italy tried reforms much more than Germany did. Private debt is not a problem. Public debt might be a problem, but not necessarily. Italy is the second most important industrial country in the Eurozone or Europe, and Italy underperforms since joining the Euro. We all agree on this. You've written this, and I agree. And by the way, I never stated something differently. Where we disagree, but in the end, it doesn't matter, I will show you, is a question around private wealth. And as we know, Churchill was supposed to say, it was not true that he said, well, the only statistic you can trust is the own statistic. So let's have a quick view on wealth. First of all, that's what you showed. It's the data from the ECB. It's the same result. The Germans, on average, are nearly as rich as the French, a bit richer than the Italians. It's a wealth average. The median, as you pointed out, is significantly different. And if you look at the top 10%, it's all the wealth data from the ECB. You see, yes, the rich Germans are a bit richer than the rich Italians, but if you also look into it, the rich Germans are not particularly rich. So what it basically tells us, we have an issue in Germany concerning the wealth in the middle class, which is also shown just by recent data. You can't read it now, but I'm sure we can share the data, it's the text later on, by a study from my former colleagues at BCG. We basically have a range of, we have rich people, but we don't have so many people who are slightly rich. You know, in Germany, it's more broader distributed. And this is, of course, due to the point you pointed out that the Italians have more real estate. And if we include, for example, private pensions in this data, where it's also fine, we see that the level of private pensions, of the public pension in Italy and Germany are also quite similar. So on this stage, you could say Italians are not richer. The point is, and that's my point always, you know, you should also look into wealth in relation to income. And as Germans have a significantly higher per capita GDP, and as they're saving more, the question could question, you know, why do you have less wealth? We explain some reasons, but I like to go with Thomas Piketty, and this is data from Thomas Piketty, which is older. He always says, you know, look at wealth in relation to income. And you see here, Italy in 2010, it was more near to 7 times income, the private wealth. In Germany at the same time, it was around 4 times. So relative to income, you know, we somehow have the miracle in Germany of earning a lot of money, saving a lot of money, but ending up with not having so much wealth. And if you want to have updated data, you take this data here, which is from Credit Suisse. It comes yearly as a global wealth report. And you see here that Italians, compared to the income of Italy, are even richer than Swiss people. Of course, because Swiss people have a very high GDP per capita. And that's my only point. I just say, you know, if you put it into context of income, you could say, well, Italians have 6 times as much wealth, and Germans have below 4 times as much wealth. And this is clearly an issue where you could say, is it really correct to say that Italians are poorer? I would say, well, relative to income, Italians are much richer. Now, we can have many reasons for it. One is a real estate issue, but this has been my whole argument, why I said, well, shouldn't we discuss at least as to whether Italians could help themselves? And as you also pointed out, Philip, yes, the private sector in Italy has a low private debt. Actually, I've taken data from the Bank financial settlements from 2019. In this case, the Italians have even less debt than the Germans. You see it here. The private households have 41% of GDP in debt. The Germans have 54 ahead at the time being. So the private sector, companies and private households in Italy have 111%, Germans 114%. So Italians have less debt than Germans. And we clearly see here, and this was before Corona, yes, Italy has a high debt level, but here I would also go with Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty has said public debt is always a problem of the wrong distribution of wealth between the private sector and the public sector. Because if you look at the total debt level of Italy of 248%, it's significantly below France, for example. So it's very easy. And you look at the Netherlands, for example, the Netherlands have much higher debt levels. So you could say, why do Dutch people have to wire money to Italy if they have high debt levels and actually less wealth, just because Italians could deal with the problem on their own? And this is what I've written. And then, of course, we should move to the more important points. I said, we discussed in Germany wealth taxes and one-time wealth taxes because of Corona. And I just said, okay, if we assume a one-time wealth tax of 20% in Italy, this would equal 100% of GDP in reduction of public debt. And I did the calculation, you can read it here, but if you just say, okay, we just tax real estate and we say, okay, we take a rate of 25% and we do it as a mandatory mortgage over a 30-year period, one day or the other, Italians is still richer compared to GDP than the Germans are. And the public debt level is reduced by 100%. And if you do this as an equal annual calculation, it equals 3.5% of annual GDP of Italians. And by the way, if you then took a look at the tax level of Italy, you can't read it here, but I have to look myself. Italy is, okay, the tax level is higher than in Germany, but it's below France. It's at 41.9%. If you add the 3.5%, it's still below the French debt level. And it's basically nothing else than a just simple way of reducing public debt. I'm not saying it has to be done, but the point, and this was just to explain myself, when I was writing this, we had a German discussion around wealth taxes at the same time being willing, by the same people being willing to embark on a transfer union, which is not going to be justified. Just two additional information in this context. If you move as a German now to Italy, if you're a rich person and you have a big portfolio of stocks and bonds and whatsoever, if you move to Italy now, you get an offer to pay a flat tax of 100,000 euros per year, irrespective of how big your income is. It doesn't matter. It was initially done in order to incentivize Italians to come back from London. But of course, it's highly attractive for Germans. You know, it's better food, better climate, and low taxation. And there's a big move, by the way, of people going to Milano and somewhere else because they save the taxes. At the same time, if you inherit 10 million from your grandfather in Germany, his inheritance tax is around 2.25 million. If you do the same in Italy, you pay a tax of 360,000. By the way, if you inherit someone from someone you don't know, you're not relative to, in Germany of 10 million, you pay nearly 5 million in taxes. In Italy, you pay 360,000 in taxes. So I just say, we have to look into this. And therefore, that was my own point of saying, why do we discuss wealth taxes in Germany and we don't discuss wealth taxes in Italy as a solution? In my view, it doesn't matter. For me, it's more important what matters, and I try to do this in 5 minutes in order to stick to Thomas's precondition. The outlook. First point is demographics in Italy are even worse than in Germany. They're significantly worse. They will have a shrinking working force, they have a shrinking population, and therefore that sustainability and economic growth is going to be a big issue. Second point, we all know about unemployment. Unemployment is extremely high, and I'm quoting here Fabrizio Silibotti from Yale. He's one of the most influential Italian economists who says basically Spain and Italy, they have a track record of not using money wisely. They're subsidizing unemployment and they're not doing the necessary reforms. It's an Italian I'm quoting, I just quote him. Economic freedom, which might be an indicator of future progress. Yes, Italy has done reforms. I wholeheartedly agree. Still, it's number 68 in economic freedom worldwide. It's number 36 out of 45 in the European region. If you think about corruption, it's number 52, shared with Grenada. And you see, of course, Grenada, it has not improved, and corruption is a major issue. And we will see lots of the money which is going to be invested in the south of Italy ending up in the hands of the wrong people. And innovativeness. Yes, there are countries which are worse, but clearly, if you look at the patterns, Italy is a bit more than the average of the countries here on the chart, but clearly it's not as innovative as it should be if you really think about the future. So, and investments. I've shared here, the UK is the only country investing less. If you combine private sector investments and government sector investments, Italy is nearly as bad as the United Kingdom, much worse than all the other countries. This has to do with the government problems, but it has also to do with the fact that Italians prefer to spend their money outside, saving outside, leading to the trade surplus, as you all know. So my summary is here, of course, intelligent spending by governments can help. But Italy has not managed to close the gap between North and South over 100 years. The successful North, I know that Lombardia is one of the strongest regions of Europe, is struggling, also due to the euro. We have a lack of private investments, a lack of digitalization, innovation is necessary. The labor market has been improved, but it's still highly regulated. It protects the old and those who have jobs compared to those who don't have jobs. I'm currently in London. I can tell you there's so many Italians here doing all kinds of jobs that you ask yourselves, why aren't they not in Italy? The legal system is a problem, bureaucracy, red tape. demographics, political instability. Now, therefore, the IMF is saying even in 2030, Italy is going to be the only problem having major issues, the only country of the G7 being the only country, according to their projections, still having higher real interest rates than economic growth rates. And if this is true, you can't help it with subsidies because you can't close this gap. So I make it quick on the euro because I want to skip over it. We all know why the euro has issues. I just want to close the proposal because it's not only that I was saying I don't want to pay, I don't want to embark on transfer union. I just don't believe a transfer union is going to work. My proposal is the following. I propose a European redemption fund, and I've written about it extensively. I say instead of embarking on transfer union, what we should do is we should pool debt of all European countries on a European level. My proposal is to take 80%. Why do I take 80%? Because Germany after Corona is going to be 80% of GDP. So every country is going to shift to Ursula von der Leyen 80% of GDP in government debt. And to be honest, for the Italians, why don't we say 100%? It just doesn't matter. And this debt is basically grandfathered there. It will never be repaid back. It will be just refinanced over time. It might be refinanced by the ECB, and we don't put anymore into the calculation of the government debt levels of different countries. Germany would be debt-free. It could invest much more, could reduce its trade surplus, do what's necessary. Italy would have much lower debt levels. And the only thing I would combine with it would be to really go to a Hamilton approach, which means from then on, there's a strict no bailout, which means everyone who buys Italian bond knows upfront that there will be no further bailout in the future. And I would say it gives freedom, it gives autonomy, because the worst thing we can have, and I think Philipp here we might agree, is the Germans or Austrians telling the Italians what to do. Therefore, I would propose a debt restructuring where everyone participates, all the Germans, but I'm clearly against a transfer union because I still believe relative to income, the Italians are richer. And by the way, I do not believe that the Italians' problems can be solved by more money. That's been my attempt to make a quick start for discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to give the possibility to Philipp, who wants to answer right away to your points before we maybe open the discussion to other participants.
Sure, thanks for the presentation. Okay, so I mean, what you were arguing is basically that a lot of Italy's economic troubles could simply be solved domestically. And I would disagree with this. I mean, I think you need to recognize that the worst effect of the Italy myth that I was talking about and the crisis responses after the financial crisis was also the trust between Northern and Southern Europe was lost. And now simply saying all we need to do is to make the Italian government introduce massive wealth taxes in a deep crisis, a measure that is also kind of bound to be very controversial and associated with major technical political hurdles, especially in peace times. And then Germany and other EU countries will not need to do much on their part is a recipe for disaster in Europe, I would argue. I mean, sure, Italy has to do a lot and there needs to be major contributions. But I think this can only be solved with Italy in cooperation with other EU institutions and national governments. I think Italy's long crisis cannot be explained without also thinking about the incompleteness of the institutions of the Euro and the EU, and also policy inadequacies at the European level. And none of the fundamental underlying problems can be solved with one-off wealth taxes. I'm not against discussing wealth taxes, but I just think this is not something that should be pushed on Italy from the outside, especially during the COVID-19 crisis. I think this was not the right way to go. I think what's more productive is to focus on some other stuff. I mean, you said you are against the transfer union. You did not really say in detail what you mean on the transfer union. But I, for one, I'm also not in favor of permanent fiscal transfers to tackle the problem of economic divergence in Europe. I think this is not an economically or politically viable way to do it. I think Next Generation EU was right as a temporary facility, and I think it will also be good to have a permanent fiscal capacity at the European level. The Next Generation EU currently is only a temporary facility, but we would need a permanent facility that provides fiscal support in times of crisis to avoid that countries that are hit very hard get into even bigger troubles, which then have negative spillovers on other countries. But apart from that, I'm not in favor of permanent fiscal transfers. I would argue a more promising approach is to even out the regional distribution of value added, so that lagging regions, for example, in southern Italy, should be brought to similar levels of productivity as richer regions. And I mean, the tools would exist. I think what's mainly lacking in Europe is political will and ambition. You would need to think about the European industrial strategy coordinated with a national industrial strategy in Italy and other countries, targeted investments, European investment budget, but most of all, industrial policy. And I'm not arguing that all of this should be done by the public sector, but we really need to think about this in a fresh way. And I think simply pointing to kind of going with the old recipes will not work. Yeah, so I think we agree on many things, but in important respects, we probably disagree. I mean, I would also agree there is a problem in terms of population dynamics. Obviously, population developments in Italy are problematic, but this also kind of speaks to that policymakers really need to think about the labor market in particular. I mean, if you have an aging population and a shrinking working age population, you really need to get people into work so that they can also contribute to financing the system. And you should not accept high levels of unemployment or simply say these levels of unemployment are kind of structural, as estimates by the European Commission suggest. And therefore narrow the space for fiscal policymakers in Italy even further, so that they cannot push for sensible measures that like public investment in important areas that kind of can contribute also to raising potential output.
Well, Jim, I'll just quickly react. So first of all, on the wealth tax, I didn't propose it. I was just showing at the time being that it's possible, because I think equally risky is to impose wealth taxes in Germany to pay for the recovery fund in Italy, because this is also going to cause political upheaval. And I don't want to campaign against the euro or against the EU, but I would easily, I'm sure people might find it very easy to campaign such an issue, especially if you combine it with the opportunity for rich Germans to move to Italy and then just pay 100,000 euros in taxes. So it was not a proposal, it was just showing it's possible. Of course, you should not do it in the midst of a crisis. On the other hand, I still believe, if we discuss it in Germany, it's on the table. What I'm clearly pointed out, and that was, you didn't react to this one, but I think the best thing is to leave autonomy to governments. Italians telling the Germans what to do, or the Dutch telling the Italians what to do, and so on, is a recipe for political unrest in Europe, I would say, even for conflict, and that's not good for the European project. And that's why I said, why don't we pool existing debt? Because if you now pool existing debt on a European level, let's say 100% of Italian debt, we have helped Italy a lot, and then Italy can do its own decisions of doing it and not having the European Union doing it or us doing it. And concerning the restructuring fund, I'm very happy to hear you saying it's a one-time effort or a one-time instrument. Clearly, politicians in Italy, France, and Spain see it as permanent, and even the German finance minister sees it permanent. And I would say this is going to be a too high burden over time for Germany, and it's going, in the end, not going to work out, because those who receive it will never be happy because they would always like to receive more, and those who pay are not happy because they would like to have more or pay less. Therefore, I'm clearly in favor of having a debt restructuring fund everyone performs in, and then help. Last word on industrial strategy. To be honest, and this might be a fundamental difference, which also applies to not Italy, but in general, I'm skeptical about industrial strategies. The Italians have tried industrial strategies in the south with target investments, with big steel plants and whatsoever. I doubt it. I think what we really need is a liberalization. And I know this sounds, especially to Thomas Fricke, this sounds very much old-fashioned, neoliberal, but I would say we need less government. We need a stronger government. A stronger government doesn't mean a bigger government. We need to tailor investments. So we need investments in infrastructure, digitalization, but I would not say that we need a national industrial strategy.
Yes.
Should I briefly respond to the 2 points?
Yes, please.
Okay. I mean, I said that Next Generation EU is a one-time instrument because it is. I mean, that was the agreement, and you would need additional political agreements to make something similar a permanent instrument. And I mean, there will be experiences with this, and the stakes are high. I mean, Italy is the country which will receive by far the largest sum of grants and has the largest national recovery plan. A lot of spending
only is absolute. Now, relative, it's Poland.
That's true. That's true. I was talking about absolute terms. So in billion euros, so more than 200 billion euros is the recovery plan for Italy. That is a little bit more than 10% of GDP. But in relative terms, the plans are even higher in some Eastern European countries. That's true. But still, I mean, we talk about Italy here, and I would say that Italy is kind of the fault line of the Eurozone. I think we agree there, right? Simply because Italy is very big, politically important, was one of the founding members of the European Union. And if you have a country in deep economic crisis that also kind of filters into political debate and leads to a certain fatalism in political terms, that's a problem for the European Union as a whole. So it is a one-time instrument, but we should have the debate whether we should make it permanent. And I think that's something we must discuss, because in principle it was the right decision last year. Although we don't know the actual outcomes now, because the money will just need to be spent, and we will see how effective it will be. But it very much had a stabilizing effect last year, right? Remember how big the turmoil was also in markets, and how stabilizing the effect of announcing and political agreement on Next Generation EU was. Okay. Also in Southern Europe, this kind of shifted the debate and kind of brought back a little bit of trust as well. In terms of pooling of the debts and debt restructuring, a quick response. I mean, I'm always a little bit skeptical when it comes to this debt restructuring, especially when you think about certain thresholds as you do. I mean, if you look at the economic literature, there is simply no evidence that there are certain thresholds beyond which public debt becomes a problem. That you can't put the threshold at 90%, at 100%, or as in the case of Italy, at 160%. This is mainly a question of the institutional framework and coordination of monetary and fiscal policy, whether public debt remains sustainable. And if you look at forecasts by the European Commission currently, with sensible scenarios in terms of GDP growth rates and interest rate payments over the next decade, public debt to GDP should stabilize and then slightly decline again in Italy, if there are not additional major crises, of course. So I think the pooling of the debt and debt restructuring is not the best way to spend political capital. I think it's much more productive to actually talk about reforming those fiscal rules and how to coordinate monetary and fiscal policy in a way so that things can work in the Eurozone.
The point, just to make clear, the 80% is just coming out of the fact that Germany will have post-corona around 80%. And the point for me is, and that's very important, is I believe if you give autonomy, I don't believe that we will have a centralized European state soon. So we will still have governments being autonomous. And fiscal policy is going to remain autonomous. The French are never going to accept Brussels to tell them what to do, and the Italians and whatever. The Germans might, but we are the only ones. And therefore I say, gives them fiscal space, because you said, well, Italy gets 200 billion. That's a big amount. We all know relative to GDP, it's not such a big amount, if you're honest. And therefore my proposal of, everyone pools 80% or even more for Italy, because we're too generous, we support them more. And it's not a restructuring, it's a pooling, it's a grandfathering. It's basically what the Spanish proposed when there was the first discussion on the Euro Recovery Fund, the Spanish government proposed the perpetual loan. So we make a perpetual loan owned by Ursula von der Leyen. And for me, the big advantage is it helps everyone. You don't have a transfer of wealth between countries, because now we have a transfer of wealth between countries and they have a problem. And I would say down the road, if Germany, for example, also faces economic problems due to the change in industrial structure, automotive, climate change, whatsoever, the debate will come. And if you therefore reduce debt for everyone and then have autonomy, it's much smarter. That's the only point. So the 80% is just because, had Germany been by 70, I would have taken 70, whatever. It is just to say, then the Germans can spend more, and we all want that Germany invests more in the country. We want that Spain invests more. We want that Italy invests more. But I think we should not tell them how to do it. And that was my plan of saying, instead of now building up new debt over time on the European level, one big step, and everyone participates. And I think this is from a fairness point of view, it's important. And then I would achieve the same like you, lower debt levels, so you can invest. But we don't have people telling you how to invest, because I believe people telling how to invest is a major risk for political stability.
Yes, thank you very much, both. I saw Thomas Bricke popped up, so maybe he wants to intervene.
I have a lot of questions, but I didn't want to stop you discussing between you two. What I was wondering, Daniel, if you can explain, I mean, it's interesting how you developed the idea of the Germans need to pay. How is it exactly that Germans need to pay for Italians? And then you said the wealth tax is on the table. I mean, as far as I'm informed, there are some parties who are proposing it that are not the parties who are most probably doing it. But anyway, but it's in these parties, the argument is not to pay for Italy. It's to.
No, it's not. No. I didn't say it's not for Italy. No. What I say was just at the time being when I was saying, well, Italy could help itself, at least with this calculation. There was a discussion going on Twitter with some economists who are at the same time also supporting a wealth tax. So this was the starting point at the time being. So no one is saying we increase taxes for Italy. Now, currently, as you all know, we are the biggest contributor to the recovery fund. I think it's 180 billion. So Philipp might have the correct number of what the net payment of Germany into the recovery fund is. I think it's 180 billion, as we are the biggest contributor, of course, and Italy being in absolute terms the biggest beneficiary. Of course, you could say there's money flowing from Germany to Italy. Now you will say we are the biggest beneficiary of the euro. We could have a discussion on there. We all know that some parts of the German society are beneficiaries and some are losers. So the beneficiaries, of course, are the owners of the export-oriented companies. The broad public is not necessarily benefiting as much, given the fact that, for example, in the past, before you had the euro, you could go to Italy on cheap holidays and go shopping. So it's a bit more complicated. It's not like a black-white, but I'm just saying, if you embark on transfers and you basically use taxpayer money, which is in the end it is, in order to support efforts in Southern Europe, down the road, this could cause political unhappiness, because people will say, why are we doing it? Especially as those who pay the taxes are not necessarily those who benefit from the euro in making money out of exports. Keep in mind that the export-oriented companies are mainly owned by foreigners.
I'm not really happy with how you frame it. I mean, you're right that there is a lot of discussion about who's like a net contributor and who's like a net receiver in terms of money flows from the EU budget to certain countries. But I think that is also kind of short-sighted. I mean, if we think about next generation EU, Germany will, even if they pay larger contributions, also be a net beneficiary, simply because other countries will recover faster, and thereby due to positive spillovers, Germany will also benefit. And I mean, as you also pointed out before, I mean,
who benefits in Germany? You have to. The point for me is we are not in such a disagreement. We are very much aligned. I just say in Germany, it's not that Germany benefits, it's a part of the German society which benefits, and there are other parts who are not benefiting, because again, export-oriented companies are the biggest beneficiaries. And if you think about Michael Pettis has very clearly explained, who is winning or benefiting from, so it's not a country, but it's a certain part of society. That's my only point I'm making. And I just say, and I think my logic is just, instead of embarking on transfers and in my view, it's going to become a permanent mechanism. and which down the road, in my view, is going to lead to tensions. I would say rather say, you know, show solidarity, pool debt, pool existing debt, and give freedom back to the countries to do what they should do, because they want to do, because it's always better than to say something, because the more we have the transfer unions, the bigger the check Germans believe to send, you can say, well, I guess I get some money back, the bigger the checks they send to Brussels or to other countries, the higher the demand will be, the higher the pressure will be to say, but now we want reforms. Just imagine the worst case we both don't want to have happen, that Italy is not going to recover in spite of the money they get. Let's assume in 2 years or 3 years' time, it's not showing. What kind of discussion are we going to have then? And this is a much more difficult discussion than if we had pooled existing debt and have given them autonomy.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think we would not need to pool the debt to allow for more public investment in certain areas in Italy and other countries. We could also do that by, which is currently ongoing or has already started, by debating sensible reforms to the EU's fiscal rules to allow for certain investments. Or to make sure that countries are not punished if they want to push for certain investments.
Yeah, but Philipp, the point is, but no, I think it's true. What's happening then? And again, I'm a big I'm very critical on the German economic policy. Some people might know I'm very critical. I don't like the black zero. I think it's totally stupid. There are many issues with it. But the point is, running a government deficit means printing money. As we all know. You know, MMT in this part is totally correct. It's just double bookkeeping entry. So it's very clear. Therefore, if we share currency, therefore, running public deficits creates money. And therefore, we need to have some mechanism of making it fairer. Otherwise, it also implies a wealth transfer, because a euro coming into existence due to an Italian deficit is also valuable in Germany. We don't have their old currencies anymore. And therefore, the issue around, we need to organize it in some way. And at the same time, we have different needs. So the Germans have to spend more, the Italians have to spend more, but they have a higher debt level already existing. And therefore, balancing this debt level, helping them to get rid of your legacy, because you point out there's a legacy issue mainly, and we agree. This is helpful, helping them getting rid of the legacy, but giving them the freedom to define the path forward.
I like generally I like knowing all the caveats I like the idea on reducing the debt level, because it's maybe one of the fundamental issues behind what Italy is doing, because I mean they had to have these primary surpluses. But arguing, as you argue on political economy, and if Germans will support the current system and the solution from last year, pooling existing debt, wouldn't that immediately pull people out that will cry out the Schuldenunion? And
well, but it would be, if you participate, we would also put our own debt. If you put 80% of GDP of Germany's debt, public debt, on this pool as well, we would benefit. Everyone would benefit. Everyone is low debt. We don't have more debt than before. It's currently we wire money. Somehow we wire money, or we take on we guarantee for credit, whatever. But currently it's new money which is spent somewhere else. If you now say everyone participates, and then if you are even flexible and say, look, for Italians and for France and for Greece, it's a bit more, because then it doesn't matter in the ends. But Germany participates as well, and has basically, let's imagine, Thomas, we have a debt-free government in Germany, and we start investing, and we do this climate change and all this kind of stuff which we like to do. It's possible, and it's not restructured. It's basically, we all know over time money loses value. It's just putting it into a perpetual structure. And as the ECB anyhow is active, they can, if necessary, refinance it, but probably it might not even be necessary. So we basically have a long-term, and that's, for me, it's, because it fits to the current structure, because I think it's impossible to tell the French how to spend their money. It's impossible to tell the Italians. They will not accept it. And it's easy. Salvini's and Le Pen, and they can benefit from it. And we just say, you do it as you like. But going forward, I would then really go and like to be the US way, which is Hamilton. And Hamilton has said, if Illinois is bankrupt, it's bankrupt. It's not the issue of the federal government. And if you reduce that level significantly, and then you make it clear, and then you have clauses in the bonds that, you know, for down the future, you make restructuring easier, then the market can work. But I would always try to deal with the past, and I would not like to open up a structure for the future, because, and I skipped it out of my presentation, but there was a study by the IMF, and I can look it up again, and they did a study showing that if you have economic shocks, even in Germany or whatever, most of the shock is covered by private capital flows and not by government transfer, not by Länderfinanzausgleich. And the point here is that in Europe, you don't have these private flows anymore in the Eurozone. And just you can never have a big enough transfer union to make it up, because, Philip, you talk about 200 billion in Italy, but that's what it's compared to GDP, it's nearly nothing. It is spent over several years. So over years, it's actually relative to GDP per year, I think it's 2 or 3%. This doesn't move the needle.
One other question, just to use the opportunity on for both of you. What would this, all you're discussing and you're proposing, Daniel, would solve the problem that I think is one of the main issues in the Eurozone, is that, and for Italy, is that there is this, how did Daniela Gabor call it, this privilege, this, she had a wonderful term for this, excessive.
Extraordinary privilege of Germany.
Which is, I mean, yes, due to whatever decades of stability, whatever, but at some point it gets self-fulfilling, and it's, you know, Germany has this enormous privilege, and the other countries struggle, and they probably will struggle for a very long time still to get at that point. So at each and every crisis, and that's what we're living through since at least 2009, at each crisis, you always have this difficulty that capital is going to the safe haven, and then the problem arises. Would that be solved by a pooling idea? And what else could help this? I mean, except the ECB that is telling the markets that they will do everything they.
Well, you know, if you talk always about safe assets, of course, if you have my pool, and the pool is refinanced by bonds over time, because when a German government bond comes due, it's paid back by the pool, and the pool takes on your money to pay you back. That's how it works over time. So over time, the share of the, you know, therefore you generate a market of safe assets, and the safe asset, if everyone guarantees for it, should be in future something better than Germany's, and by the way, faster than the current proposal. So and again, Germans can participate, and I don't understand why any politician should object to it in Germany. I discuss it with some, and they say, "Oh, we can't do it." But if you really think it through, we don't lose anything, and we are helping Europe, and we get the benefit of stopping our ridiculous discussion around tax raises in Germany.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of this extraordinary privilege of Germany as the safe haven, well, this is about actually government bond yields in Germany being lower than in other countries, or in other words, other countries having a risk premium vis-a-vis Germany. And this is something that is often also not really acknowledged in the German debate, I think. And this speaks to the importance of the ECB backstopping the government bond markets. I mean, we saw that during the Euro crisis. This is also something that was very problematic for Italy and pushed Italy towards counterproductive fiscal consolidation in 2011, 2012, that the ECB back then was not backstopping the government bond markets, was not acting as the lender of last resort under clichés. And then in the middle of 2012, there was this famous Draghi speech, we will do whatever it takes, the announcement of the OMT program. And then interest rates on Italian government bonds and government bonds of other countries went on a steep decline without the ECB actually buying any bonds under the OMT program. And also the risk spreads towards Germany were much smaller. I mean, we also saw that at the start of the COVID-19 crisis, when interest rates on Italian government bonds started to increase. But as soon as the ECB intervened by announcing the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, PEP, this was also stopped. So the point I want to make here is, and this is something that also many people in Germany don't like to discuss. If you want to give Italy fiscal space over the years and decades to come, obviously you need to think about coordinating fiscal and monetary policy in a way that you avoid an increase in interest rates on Italian public debt, because this could then again lead to an increase in public debt to GDP ratio. And if you then in addition don't change the EU's fiscal rules, policymakers in Italy are in big trouble. And so I simply can't understand op-eds by policymakers like Wolfgang Schäuble, who wrote this opinion piece in the Financial Times 2 weeks ago, calling for basically a return to fiscal policy as during the Euro crisis. I think we really need to change. I'm not sure whether the pooling of the debt and debt restructuring is the way to go. I think it would be more productive to actually discuss the 2 points I was mentioning: how to reform the EU's fiscal rules and how to coordinate monetary and fiscal policy better. I think, for example, you would to put in the treaty that the ECB should be the purchase of last resort of government bonds. And that would kind of also have a stabilizing effect and avoid self-fulfilling prices for Italy and other countries.
Yeah, I just make me first of all, we agree on Schäuble. Although he wrote about something like a debt redemption fund, he had something in the article. The only piece, of course, I like. If you point out again, I'm not talking about debt restructuring. I'm talking about debt pooling and long-term refinancing, and basically having time taking care of it. The second point is we have lower debt levels then in all countries, and then all countries can benefit. And you could also say Germany should then commit to spend more domestically, to increase domestic consumption and so on, which also means lowering taxes and whatever, and investing more and doing climate change or whatever you want. The point clearly is down the road on Italy, and therefore we have to keep in mind, in the end, money is not going to fix the problem of Italy, because demographics are very poor. Governance is very poor. We have still corruption, all these issues. I don't want to repeat them. And therefore, down the road, I would believe the only people who can reform Italy are Italians. And, if you have kids, it's the same. Kids, when they're in school, they only start becoming better in school when they realize themselves that they have to learn, not because parents push them. And the same holds true for governments and politicians. And therefore, I would always argue, it helps them now. We have done with a big debt restructuring, which means pooling. You have got to get rid of a big of a legacy, but then we have rules going forward, because if one country runs huge deficits, the other runs smaller deficits, you have this imbalancing around money creation. And then Italians have to wake up and say, okay, they have to change something fundamentally. It's not just money, it's about lots of issues. And to be honest, and I'm not sure if they're going to make it. To be very clear, I'm not sure, because the problems are very, very big, and they're only partially due to the euro.
Just to use the opportunity to counter, that reminds me very much to talk about Germany in 2005 and 2006. It's still
and we reformed. That's what I'm saying. But we reformed.
I'm talking about 2005 and 6 still. When people were talking about and writing books about Germany being at the end, and that the reforms that Schröder did was just a slight beginning and nothing changed. And you can always find, if you go in a selective way, 1,000 arguments why a country is bad, if the country is bad, maybe for very different reasons. And nearly nobody saw that Germany would have a 15 years upswing in growth and reduction of unemployment. So I'm a little skeptical on these.
Well, to be honest, I think Italy has many advantages: beautiful landscape, great food, great culture. So I think they have lots of assets. I'm not ruling it out, but I say it is in the hands of the Italians and not in the hands of the Germans to define the fate of Italy.
Quick reaction to that, very quickly. I mean, obviously, it's many of those things are in the hands of the Italian government, but it's still about the conditions or how you kind of make sure that the conditions are there so that Italians can actually pull it off. I mean, and that's
Agreed.
why I'm talking so much about how we talk about things in Germany and other countries. I think the policy stance of Germany after the financial crisis was not helpful to sorting things out.
I fully agree. In Greece, I fully agree. The point is we have a total.
We are
agreement.
outsiders. Basically, we are outsiders talking about Italy. And what I have been doing is basically telling people who are also mainly outsiders, hey, look, there are some data, there are some facts that do not match or are not consistent with the story that you are telling. But obviously, a solution cannot be found only in Brussels. Obviously, this needs to be something that is worked out in Italy in cooperation with EU institutions and other national governments. Given that we have a set of common institutions, and economic policy won't work if we don't coordinate.
Perhaps just to add this, Daniel. I think there's a lot of to think about the pro-cyclicality of a lot of indicators you're quoting and you're mentioning. I mean, obviously, productivity is pro-cyclical. So saying that in a crisis productivity is low is like saying, yes, okay, we don't know.
But over 20 years, you know that over 20 years Italy was significantly lower. It's the worst in the EU. So of the big EU countries. So I agree with you, but over 20 years it's a bit.
If you have over 20 years a fiscal policy that drives primary surpluses, so you take out of money out of the economy, maybe it's not so astonishing to have low growth and then low productivity. So I mean, it's just to say, I mean, sure.
No, we get back to the root. We get back to the root and say, the biggest help we can give Italy is to get much lower government debt levels. And there are two options. One option is to tax the rich in Italy. And now you say, well, you should not do this in a crisis. Fine. And I particularly not I would say it's not necessarily, it's not what I would say. And then the alternative is to say, okay, move it to Ursula von der Leyen. And then I say, if you move it to Ursula von der Leyen, then please offer it for all of us and not just with Italians. That's my only point.
So okay. I would take the opportunity.
Yeah, please.
Do you want to add something? Okay.
No, I just want to say that this is still a very good discussion if we talk about these very economic things, leaving perhaps a little bit beside the more emotional nationalist tone. And yeah, Hanover, thanks a lot.
Italy.
Yes, exactly. I would like to take the opportunity to remind that we're already a bit over time of our little shortcut. I just wanted to thank you both for your very interesting inputs, and just to quickly go back to the narrative and language point, which is also a very important topic here at the forum for us. Your initiative, Philipp, is very much appreciated. And I mean, I believe even if the outreach is not massive, I believe it is important to create these little spaces of discussion and to bring together also different heads and, to try to challenge a bit the dominant narrative, a narrative that, in my opinion, is unfortunately not only dominant in the so-called frugal countries, but in some circles of Italy too. And on the one side, and on the other, I believe it is important for Germany and the Netherlands and other countries to understand that by insisting with this, deceiving language or rather paternalistic attitude, they provide a very appealing argument for right-wing populist voices in Italy, and these arguments will be used to fuel anti-EU feelings. And I think we all here agree that an Ital exit or Uscitalia, however you want to call it, is something which is not desirable, nor for Italy, neither for Europe. So if not for solidarity, at least for opportunism, maybe we should try to really challenge a bit this dominant narrative. This is more of an invitation than other, but yes, so thank you very much all. If nobody wants to add anything else, then I would just call it for it. And yes.
Okay, tante grazie, buona serata.
Grazie a voi.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.